and resources are empowered intentionally.
Hello and welcome to America's Heroes Group. My name is Stephanie Collada, here as a host for the very first time. So excited to be here for all of this. And I'm excited to interview Keisha Jackson. She is a family caregiver and a partner of America's Heroes Group. She is a retired Air Force veteran and family caregiver and champion. Sorry, I'm so nervous. After being the primary caregiver for her mother, who had stage 4 inoperable lung cancer, and her brother, who fell and was placed on life support for 6 months, she shares knowledge she gained and has become an ardent supporter of family caregivers out there. So welcome, Keisha.
Hi, Stephanie. Happy New Year. So great to be with you. I think this is maybe our second time that we've been together. I think we did it maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm excited. We got girl power rocking today.
Yes. I know many people know me for the congressional side, but I do try to help out in other advocacies in other ways. And this is a very interesting subject for caregivers, especially with things that's been going on. And I know in Congress, they've been having a lot of stuff that's been going on. But today that you're here is to discuss the cost of caregiving, financial, physical, emotional, and spiritual. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so caregiving, I always say, is it is just like, it is my life work, and I became a caregiver, as you read, and or as you mentioned, about when I was caring for my mother, who had stage 4 inoperable lung cancer. And I learned that my mother had this terminal illness by literally getting a phone call from my brother, walking into her hospital room, and the doctor told us to prepare for life support. And so caring for my mom was on a fixed income. My dad had passed. She was getting this veteran's pension, widow's pension. And so she wasn't getting a lot of support. So even while I was caring for my mom, there was a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that was coming. And I learned, and I think the majority of caregivers learned, that, first of all, that you are a caregiver when there's a crisis or something happens, because before that, you don't even think you're a caregiver. You're just doing it. You're just going in and out of your pocket. And before you know it, you could be bankrupt, or you can be, your health could be failing, or you could be depressed. And so all of those different things is what I want to talk about, kind of like some of the things that came specifically that I learned in those particular situations for care with my mom, but really overall, just the cost of being a family caregiver.
Yeah. It's really important, because a lot of veterans, they do depend on others at times to be caregivers for them. Yeah. And a lot of times it's a spouse or child or, other family member or even a friend. They don't identify themselves as caregivers or understand the programs out there for them. I remember speaking years ago with a friend of mine, actually a coworker, when I was still in the Army Reserve, about his father, because his father's a veteran and his mother drives the father, to the VA. It's like a 2-hour drive to the closest VA. They didn't have a clinic nearby. And she spent so much time on him that she couldn't really hold down a job. And it was a huge financial cost on him and for the rest of the family, because the rest of the family was trying to work on that as well. So it's very difficult when that thing happens, and they had no idea about the caregiver program, and I had to give them the information then, and I was still working for the Army. I was not doing this stuff yet.
That's one of the things with that. For military veterans, a lot of them are not within walking distance, if I could just say it like that, to the closest VA medical facility. A lot of them are in rural areas, and so it's very, very, very difficult. And whether you're active duty, I found a dependent, whether it's a spouse dependent or either your children dependent, there's this innate ability that you have, and now I'll just say, to be tough, right? and to take it all, or you may not tell anybody, or you may, because you go PCS from different places, you may not have that support group to say, hey, I need help, and you try to take it all in yourself. And before you know it, there's a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that you may even have yourself, whether it's, like you said, traveling a distance, paying for gas, some paying for tolls, maybe some having to get a babysitter or a nanny. It's just so much that you don't think about until you're in that situation. And then you're forced to come up with, to what do you do? And so even in that situation, maybe it was aid and attendance or something that you were able to tell others about. But some of the things, the good thing is those programs are out there, but for like so many people, those things are good to learn if we would just be so proactive in the planning, instead of now we're forced into this situation. And now you have to fill out the application. You got to find paperwork. You got to get the Social Security. The person may not want to talk about it. You have all of these different things that's extending that time. But that health situation is still the same, and they need day-to-day help. They may need depends, they may need someone to sit with them while you go to work or you try to take a nap. And so you have all of those things that affect the cost, the physical cost, the financial cost, the emotional cost, even the spiritual cost of being a caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. I was just looking up before we had this interview. And according to the AARP, family caregivers spend an average of $7,242 a year on caregiving.
Yeah. And with that's not recent. That's been for a while.
A couple years. Yeah, that's a couple of years old. It's not a new report. So who knows what it could be right now.
Well, but that's based off of, and I'm an AARP volunteer, so I definitely just support it in the research that we do. But even if you think about it, that is the ones most of the time when you are actively caregiving, you're not taking a poll. You're not being involved in a survey. So sometimes, and I don't know because I didn't go back and I've read that a while ago to see the ones that were actually, they had polled to get that information. But that's probably a light number. I would think it's a lot higher than that, because if you think that's what you're saying, and out of pocket, it may be what you spend just for the addition for the pharmaceutical portion of it or the financial portion of it. But there's so many different things, because if you're taking off work, you're losing work, you're losing hours, you're not contributing if you have a 401k. We don't have pensions anymore, you're not putting into your retirement. So overall, there's so much more the cost. And even with, I don't know if it was that report or another, AARP had noted that it's like $600 billion on average a year that's being paid out of for that family caregivers are paying. And that, I think that's as of like 2021. And I think around 2017, it was probably about 450 billion. So you see, that's in just those 4 years, it went up another $150 billion out of pocket that family caregivers are contributing.
Yeah. And I saw that report. It's estimated 36 billion hours of care.
Yeah. A week. Yeah. And if you think about it, the average cost for family caregivers, I think it may be tied into that. And I said, I haven't looked at it in a while, but it was saying that they were paying, if you averaged out, it averaged out to about 18 hours a week for, it was about $16.59 an hour. But that's not a lot. Can you live off of $16.59 an hour, especially if you have children? Or a lot of caregivers are in that sandwich generation where you're caring for maybe your parents or your spouse, but then you also have children in the house that you're trying to feed, and they want to be on the basketball team or the soccer team, and you're trying to pay for their uniforms, and all of those things are going on. So the financial costs are just continually increase.
Yeah, especially if you're living in a state that you have your support system there to help you still, but it's not enough. But it's also a state where it's high to live, like California. Florida, I think the last time I saw the report, and I know this was before COVID, you needed to earn $22 an hour just to survive.
Exactly.
Just to survive. Yeah. I'm like, come on, that was before COVID. That's wild. It's $16 an hour. No.
And then that's what I said, it goes back to where I was talking about caregivers don't realize the cost of it. And I'm not having this conversation or dialogue to try to deter people from being a family caregiver, because in-home and community-based services is really the best care that you can provide for your family member and your loved one. But it's just my heart, my desire, my passion to get people to really think about it really before you become a caregiver, and maybe put some planning and some things in place to be able to help you and your loved one along the way.
Yeah. So what other costs that we talked about financial, can you go a little bit more into other costs that happen when you are being a caregiver?
Yeah, well, you have mentioned one of the things is the emotional cost, the mental health cost. And for the veterans alone, I think the depression rate for caregivers is twice that of the population of the normal community, if I could just say it like that, outside of the veterans. Okay. I wasn't thinking about the right word to say, and definitely don't want to be disrespectful to anyone. But yeah, if it's twice the rate where you have a family member that is now more depressed, and it's a little bit about what we talked about earlier, you may not want to share with anyone. And it may be not just because of yourself, but sometimes family members feel like they're protecting their loved one by not saying anything. You may not want that family veteran, that person in the military, to be reported or to lose their job, or so you don't want to say anything, or you might be embarrassed, or different things like that. So depression is very high. The thoughts of suicide are extremely high. I think the suicidal rate for, and I won't say necessarily for those that are caring for those, our military population or our veterans, but just the civilian population is probably it could be 30% higher, because you become overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed by this massive assignment that you have to become a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor, a Uber driver, a taxi driver. You become the chaplain. You have to become the dietitian. And you didn't go to school for any of those, but we talked about it. But now you're getting paid $16.59 an hour roughly, although that's not really what you're getting paid. But now you're the jack of all trades, the master of none. And you're watching your loved one, in some case, deteriorating. And that is very emotionally, financially, spiritually, that's very heavy for a person.
It is. What resources out there do you really recommend for people?
Well, this may be something that you could talk about, because we were chatting it up a little bit, and we were talking about for the veterans. And always, if for veterans, check and see the resources out there for aid and attendance that we were talking about, and seeing if you as a dependent can get if there's a pay that you can get as a dependent caring for that loved one. And we know that there are, and I do believe for the VA that they don't tie it based off of your income like some of the other things outside of that do. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to your VA to get support. I always, and it seems like the last few months that we've been on here, I am a big proponent of reaching out to your local area agency on aging. AAA, the AAA, not the card, but the local area agency on aging. They are very, very, extremely very, and I know that's not the proper way to say it, connected with the local area, because a lot of the resources that we can talk about may be state, they're going to provide more state and local, where we may be talking about more from a federal, at a higher level. And if you're talking about them for a higher level, normally that's going to take a little bit longer to get those things put in place. But if you're working with someone that knows about maybe this mom and pop market or grocery store in your neighborhood that provides a discount, or there's a taxi service in your neighborhood, or they provide Meals on Wheels or different things like that. So that's why I always recommend people contact their local area agency on aging.
I see it all the time for me, and I do like to recommend people to actually reach out on social media, because sometimes there's a lot of Facebook groups that out there that are by geographical location. There's veterans groups. There's lots of other groups that out there you can just say, hey, I'm in a situation. I need help. Where can I go? This is my location. Yeah. And sometimes you can really find great organizations. There's one when I used to live in St. Pete, there was a food kitchen. Didn't ask you what your income was. You came in, and it was really nice because it was kind of like a grocery store. And they gave you what you can get in each category.
Oh, yes.
And there's no questions asked. You just go in, get the stuff, and then you can go.
Yeah, we have a couple of those in this area, the pantries where they allow you to go in and encourage you to be able to go in and just get those particular items to be able to help you. The thing is, I had someone on the show maybe about 4 years ago, and she was caring for a mom who had dementia. And a form of dementia. I don't remember. I think it might have been Alzheimer's. She was a government worker. She might have still been actively working for the government at the time when her mother was diagnosed with a form of dementia. And so at that time, she was financially well and her husband was living. And so she did not sign up for any assistance, right? Even in this case, she didn't even sign up to be with a local area agency on aging for the Meals on Wheels and the other programs.
Right.
And so it was a progression of, as her mother's health became worse. I wish I had the number, so I'm just going to make up something, and even if it's grossly exaggerated, it'll make sense to relate back to her. She said she waited, then her money started depleting, and she didn't have the money that she needed. So say like it was about 10 years later. And when she went back, she was like 8,000 and something on the list of the waiting list to get assistance. And it took her like another 4 years to get at the top of the list.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so it's those things. That's what I say, early planning, is so important that we really need to do that. I'm actually helping several people right now, about 5 different individuals try to relocate, and all of them are in the senior ages. One place I called for affordable dwelling units. They call them ADUs in some places.
I've heard that. Yeah.
When I called to find out about this apartment, they told me that the waiting list is 4 years. Another place, the waiting list was 2.5 years, right? And so you have this individual that may be on a fixed income at that particular time. So what do? Where do they go? So now it goes back to the caregiver. You may have to come out of pocket. They may be staying with you. You may have to go and they may have to move into assisted living, and unless they are on Medicare, or something like that, where the cost is just kind of consumed in all of that, then what do? Because the cost of being in assisted living, I think it may be starting at like $8,000 a month. Who has that kind of money? I mean, people have it, but not a lot of people don't have it. I'll just say it like that.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's just wild and so scary. We talked about pre-planning. Now, Keisha and I just talked a little bit about it before we started recording, or talking on this. And so pre-planning, my mother passed in October, and last October. And one of the biggest things that really happened, because it wasn't a surprise, because she had congestive heart failure, and my dad took on a lot that he wasn't used to. Because my mom was the breadwinner. She did everything with the house, with all the bills, everything, taxes even. So when she suddenly passed, my dad was so busy just trying to take care of her. Then the planning for her death was also pretty wild and sudden. Can you talk about that a little bit?
The emotional cost, or the planning of
everything? So go for it.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about in the last December the 31st and today's day, there's been at least 4 people that I know that have passed.
Oh my goodness.
One has had a stroke. One has had a heart attack. And these are all people that I'm associated with. So let's start with the ones.
Sorry. By the way, I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you for that sincerity. One of the ones, there was a death. Now, the mother had told the daughter, the only child, that they had the insurance, health insurance, right? Life insurance. I can't remember which one it was, but to be able to take care of everything. I don't remember which one they had. It might have been life insurance. Well, comes to find out, she told her daughter she had everything planned, picked out, everything. Well, comes to find out when it's her insurance policy, that the insurance policy that she had was for accidental death only.
Oh, no.
So now there's this GoFundMe page that goes up at the 9th hour trying to get the funds. Another one that had passed, when she passed, she has a life insurance policy, but because she had not told anyone about it, she was very private and kept everything to herself. No one can find it to even reach out to the insurance company to be able to put those things in place, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I talked to another one. He's like a father figure for me when I was growing up. Now I will say, when he and I spoke the other day, he said something the other day that I was so glad to hear, that he's 80 years old now. And he said, he's not going to be here, or 80 more years. He went to the place where they had his wife's memorial service, and she was cremated. And he asked them, what is the cost? I want to make sure now that I put these things in place so I don't have to have my children to be able to do this. But that is so rare, So dealing with that, trying to help people prepare for those, the cost of a funeral expenses is horrible, right? I have a friend that is in that business, and who told me one time is that a lot of the undertakers, they make a lot of their money in the caskets. Because I found out when my mom passed that it was like a 600% markup for caskets. And what they didn't want you to know is that you can rent a casket, or you can get a casket online. But then that mind comes in where they'll say, well, if you do this online, you do realize that the casket may not come there in time. So once you hear that, now you're fearful, right? And so it's all of these different things. But I'm not saying that to discredit that business, not at all. I just say things for people to think about and try to get them in the pre-planning and early planning. So whether it's life assurance, whether it's setting aside funds, whether it's deciding what's going to happen, do you want to be cremated? Should this person be cremated? Who's the power of attorney, the financial power of attorney, the health power of attorney? What is all of these things are things that is just so passionate to really just keep bringing to the foreknowledge to get people to talk about. And then the other side of it is the emotional side. Now this person maybe that you've lived with, that was your spouse for 30, 40, 50 years, who's you finish each other's sentences, right? And now you're watching this person, whether it's a congestive heart failure or maybe even dementia, because they talk about dementia as one of the most difficult situations for a person to care for, because it becomes more, there's like no cure, if we could say it like that. So it's a progressive degenerative disease, if I could say it like that. So you may go from a couple hours to now 10 hours a week, or 10 hours a day, or to 24 hours watching this person. And so you're watching this person not be the person that you used to laugh with or have fun with, and now it's emotionally wearing on you, So all of these things are part of that. Or you feel guilty if you have to put your loved one in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. You feel like it's your fault, like you've done something wrong, Or you may have siblings that look down on you because you're doing that, but they're not there from the day to day to see what's best for that individual. So all of these are part of the cost of caregiving.
Yes, it is. And it's so wild how it is with dementia, because it can also change your personality. Mm-hmm. I've seen personalities change with older people that I've known when they develop dementia, that they go from like really easygoing, nice person to very mean and just short-tempered. And people that have never cursed in their lives, or at least I've never heard them curse in their lives, and then they start cursing. And it can become a security risk or a safety risk for caregivers as well. And that can be really scary situations for that as well.
Well, and not just a person with dementia, that definitely happens, but sometimes pain or medication will make the words come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Woo. And a lot of times that primary caregiver is that one. It could be that one child. It could be 13 other children, 12 other children, 10 other children. But it's that primary caregiver that a lot of times take the brunt of the pain of the words, and or the cursing, or I don't like you, or it could be so many different things. Again, because of what they're dealing with, it could be laying on your back, looking up at the ceiling day to day with bed sores on your back, needing someone to turn you, needing someone to scratch your ear for you, all of those different things. Or maybe something you didn't say to someone that you are really regretting when you were a lot younger can cause some of that bitterness and the hurt to come out. And so it takes a very strong person, that caregiver, to be able to say, okay, it's okay, and to kind of turn their ear, turn their cheek to allow some of those different things to come out. But sometimes it's just so bad, and words hurt, and they're very painful. And sometimes that happens when you're caring for someone that maybe abused you when you were a child, or neglected you. And now you're in that position where you have to care for that person now. And again, all of this going to what we've been talking about, the cost of being a family caregiver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, it is so scary at times. So there's one more part about with the pre-planning, because when my father had to deal with my mother's death, he didn't even have the codes to the cell phones that my mom had, that didn't know the bank accounts, didn't know what else to do with that. And honestly, he didn't even know that you can file for Social Security when you lose a spouse. He didn't know that. I was the only one out of my family that knew that. And I only knew it because it was part of a briefing I had when I started my federal job. Thank God for that one. But can you talk a little bit more about that too?
Well, it's just so much that you don't know. Right.
Yes.
And that's what I was saying in the beginning. People don't even realize that they're a caregiver until you realize that something happens and now it pops up unexpected. And now you find yourself having to find out about Social Security and seeing if it's available, or like we talked about the VA and what benefits are out there. Or if you have a loved one or a child with special needs when they turn 18, what needs to happen before they turn 18, all of these things. So again, the best thing that I can do, and I really hope and I really pray and that what comes out of these conversations is that people would really, really think about this, because a lot of times you don't want to talk about it. It's frustrating. You don't want to talk about death. You don't want to talk about finances. You don't want to talk about these different things, and they're all needed to be able to help put things in place. Do you know the PIN? Do you know the bank? Or I was saying with the insurance policy, they have no idea where the person's insurance policy is at to be able to help. Or there's a situation where the person got the insurance, but it was for accidental death only.
Yeah. You need to read into a lot of those things and know where to go. Like, I'm traveling to New York soon, and I told my sister, hey, something happens to me, that my will's here. My partner has it too, that at his place, this is, and it's got all the instructions, like all down to how to care for my cats.
That's so good. That's so good.
It's really important to have those things out there, and also discussed with your family members. That
could be so difficult, because sometimes family members don't want to listen. Sometimes it's too difficult for them, and sometimes it's like, they don't believe it. They're just putting on, because you're so used to be around that person all their life, So it's just a lot. And again, I just hope the conversations that we have about being family caregiver, and in today particular, the cost of caregiving, not just the financial cost, the emotional cost, the spiritual cost, the occupational cost, the loss of jobs, the loss of your health, all of those things, that you think about those things and try to put little things in place for yourself to be able to help yourself.
Awesome. There's lots of important things. I'm glad people are here to hear it and to learn. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and enjoy this whole new year. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks, Keisha.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Market, advertise, and sponsor your business with Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelly and America's Heroes Group, where information and resources are intentionally disseminated via radio, print, and social media. Call our office for more details at 312-803-2618.
I'm Ken Jennings. All of us here at Jeopardy want to thank you for your service to our nation. We truly honor and appreciate you, and what's more, we're looking for contestants like you to play on our show. So head to Jeopardy.com now and take the Anytime test, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon right here on the Alex Trebek stage.
AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Good evening. Welcome to America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. I am your host, U.S. Army Colonel, Combat Medic and Flight Surgeon, Dr. Damon Arnold, U.S. Army National Guard retired. And I have a really incredible guest. And the information, we've been exchanging stories off and on, seems like all day. She just really told me how to protect myself in Florida in case an alligator attacks me about grabbing its eye, which I never would have thought about, especially when being confronted that way. Mm-hmm. But we have AHG partner Stephanie Collada, a U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class veteran and founder of the Political Veterans Podcast and AHG correspondent. The topic today is President Trump's address to the joint session of Congress. And Stephanie's AHG monthly newsletter article, how are these budget cuts and firings affecting veterans across the country? So, this is really an incredible topic and timely. So welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, thanks. Yes, the whole Florida thing. When you're raised in Florida, it's kind of like Australia. Everything's out to get you, pretty much. So yes, we were talking about that before the show. So yes, everybody. So.
But you were mentioning before, like veterans make up about 30% of the federal workforce, mm-hmm. and some 6,000 have already been fired, and so there are things that are going on that we need to be aware of. So what are you seeing now?
Well, I know for specifically what I've been researching, there's been varied reports, and I know it varies on where the veterans are in the workforce in the federal government. It is 30% over the whole. I'm seeing reports that the Department of Veterans Affairs, it's actually 1 in 4 employees are veterans. So keep that in mind. And something to update for the recent newsletter that we had, a memo was leaked actually from the Department of Veterans Affairs, which actually just recently on X, Secretary Doug Collins actually confirmed everything that was in the leak of this memo. Yeah. And I'm sorry, my cat wants to say something about it as well. And
I know she's probably upset too. It's a veteran's cat.
Yes. And basically they're stating that approximately 83,000 employees will be fired in this year. And Secretary Collins have actually confirmed that is effectively 15% of their current workforce. And their target is going back to the workforce manpower levels back to 2019. And that can be concerning for people because there have actually been a large number of veterans that recently became eligible for healthcare because of the PACT Act. I've seen it online. PACT Act is not just about VA disability. The PACT Act also allowed veterans a window if they weren't eligible for VA healthcare, because there's only a certain window for you to actually enroll if you don't have a rating. This gave you an extra window when the PACT Act was passed. It gave, I believe, a year or two, a year and a half. I can't remember the time frame, but at least a year to enroll. And you still have to pay or copay and things like that to get the treatment, but at least you can get the treatment at the VA, a place that specializes in your care. But so we actually had millions of veterans become eligible, and increase the amount of clients and customers for the VA. And now we're reducing our manpower with still the same amount of customers and clients that we need to take care of.
Yeah, and these are the people that actually process those claims, right? And do the paperwork. Yes.
Not just the people that process the claims, and of course, doctors, nurses. Yeah. Those people have been saved for at least the probationary firings. Majority of the probationary employees were not mission essential, meaning that they weren't doctors and nurses. But I've been hearing conflicted stories on this, but I haven't gotten them confirmed yet. But there is worries that there's others. But the thing is that you, of course, know for doctors, it's not just we need you in the office. We also need schedulers. We need people to be taking out the trash. All of the stuff, for hazmat and hazardous materials that's there. There's a lot of support that a VA facility needs, a medical facility needs, other than just doctors and nurses.
Yeah. And, one of the things that was some of the data that came out was saying that the Department of Government Efficiency, which we're calling DOGE now, has fired about 38,000 federal employees since the start of Trump's second term to date. So we already have a big deficit that's looming in the VA system. It's kind of interesting because when we had people who were being relieved from their duties for nuclear oversight and for other things, all of a sudden they said, "Oh, we made a mistake. Oops." And it's like, well, oops can be really dangerous.
Yes. I mean, FAA, they've made a large amount of firings through the FAA, and we've had a lot of cases in the media for plane crashes or near collisions cases, which can be really scary. And I'm scared because I'm supposed to be flying, taking a big trip in April. So I'm like, I hope they get better until then. And it can affect a lot of people. I do know a lot of veterans that do go to work for the FAA and become air traffic controllers because they get their training from the military. And then they get out of the military and go work for the FAA and other, other areas inside the airports. So that's something that can be causing a lot of stress on a lot of people. And a lot of times that happens when you decrease the workforce, the quality of work also decreases. Stress decreases. Stress increases, morale decreases, which also compounds quality of work.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that has been a big issue has been the issue about whether people are competent or whether they are, at doing their job. And a lot of that was been thrown out about the performance evaluations and that kind of thing. And, I'm just wondering whether this is something that has a chilling effect on why a person who's asking the question, why should I put on a military uniform to defend the country, our nation, or serve as a federal employee? Why should I do that? Because if I really have a lot of talent and there are opportunities in the private sector, does that have a chilling effect on people who want to enter federal service?
It can. It really can, because there's a lot of people that work for the federal government that are actually underpaid in comparison to civilian sector. Doctors, especially, they get a fraction of what you can get in the civilian sector. But you also have a federal job, which is also a very esteemed, or was a very esteemed, thing to earn a federal job. A lot of people were like, yes. And, you wore it like a uniform, excuse me, with my monitor. You wear it like a uniform and you're proud of it. It's just really hard for a lot of federal employees now because they feel like they're being, feeling like they're being thrown away or, tossed aside. There are a lot of people on social media saying, well, welcome to civilian life for the civilian sector, go find another job. And that can be really disheartening as well. And especially when you're in a place where you believe that you are serving and you are sacrificing things for the job, for the federal government, for other Americans. So it can be really disheartening and hard.
Yeah, that's really important, Stephanie, because at one point, one of the things that people must understand and need to understand is when someone becomes a federal employee or they put on a uniform to serve the country. For example, with the military, if you put on a uniform and you are serving the country, there's something else motivating you other than money. If you're only making close to minimum wage to jump into a helicopter, a Jeep, or a tank to face gunfire, and incoming RPGs and, those kinds of things. So there's a motivation that goes beyond just material gain or the money about, that's involved in the situation. It has to go to your moral base and your compassion and passion for the people in the country and your sense of dedication to duty, that you're do something that is going to be furthering people. And I really get offended because I know a lot of federal employees. I know what they go through. They don't work, 8-hour days. They work out 12-hour days, 16-hour days sometimes. I know nurses who stayed past the hour of duty because they want to make sure that the people that they've been taking care of and they care about their patients actually get the kind of services they need. Yep. So, it's, because we have and if anything, we have a little bit of a short staffing to begin with going into this, so those people who are left there, who end up losing all the support from other fellow federal employees may decide, I'm gone, it's too much.
Yeah. That's pretty, that's pretty common. I do remember time for, because I actually used to be a federal employee. And I've been, so I've actually been on the other side. Right. And when we were so I've been in toxic work environments as a federal employee, and people will leave. They will find other jobs. And where I was at, it was actually Washington State for part of the time. And a lot of people were leaving for Amazon or Google and making like twice as much. Wow. I mean, they were working more, but they were making a lot more money. And so they would leave, and it would happen. So that might be the trend here that might actually cause a negative effect on it too, that we might have some issues. But I will say Secretary Doug Collins did say that they will continue to hire the mission essential positions. Yes. So the other vacancies. So it's going to be interesting to see on how that comes out, on which positions they are going to be advertising on. It's not difficult to see what they're actually advertising and moving on, because you'll see the advertisements on usajobs.gov. Yes. So you can see them if they're there, but that way you could see public access. You could track them. Another thing that's been happening recently is that Secretary Collins has confirmed it, that they've been reviewing all of the contracts that they've had. They said, I'm trying to remember, it's 2%. They've only reviewed 2% of all the contracts that they have entered in, and they have found duplicated or things that they don't need contracts. And they said that they're hopefully saving the veterans $900 million, something like $800 million. It's going to be interesting to see what the receipts are. I'm looking forward to see that. But the thing is that a lot of things that people know as veterans, and a lot of other veterans know, is that when a veteran owns a company, when they're an entrepreneur, they can actually enter in and get a preferred contract. They get a little bit of a boost when they are applying for government contracts. Well, a lot of these veteran entrepreneurs are being affected on these contract cuts as well.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, interesting. I didn't. Yeah, that's a great insight. Yeah, that is true. And one of the things I ran across was that there's a representative, Derrick Tran. He's an Army veteran and former employment lawyer, and he has a bill, directed at reinstatement of fired veterans. And that's really interesting. I think that's more of a positive move. Yes. Recognition that something is going wrong with the way things are being done. And every system has to adjust, to changes. But when you make radical changes, you need radical adjustment sometimes.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And it's always pretty scary when radical changes are made, because there's an increased rate of mistakes and errors. And so it needs to be really closely watched on those type of things. And that's the one thing a lot of people are asking for, just more oversight, more things, show us what's going on. There's there's actually a GOP lawmaker, Representative Tom Barrett from Republican from Michigan. Yes. And he's actually sent a letter to Secretary Collins asking him to review the department's workforce reduction process and considered reinstating the laid off personnel. So it's not only, Representative Tran, from the Democrat side, it's also on the Republican side that's also fighting for this.
Yes. Yeah. And it really is a nonpartisan issue. We have, people who are service members and who are federal employees who are both Republican, Democratic, and independent. And it really goes to the core of their value to the country that, yes, can we get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse and do some reductions here and there? That's any system you can do that with, right? Become more efficient. But it's how you go about it, because if you go too dramatically in one direction, you can have irreparable harm to people who are being affected.
Well, not only that, is that if you make these radical moves, like cutting these contracts, you have to make sure that you're actually cutting the contracts correctly. Because if you cut in the contracts, the government contract, and the government decides to cut the contract before it's actually says that they're allowed to, those contractors can go to court.
Yes. And
then the federal government will still have to pay that money.
Yes.
If they win the case. And it's likely, because it's happened before. There was legislation for the workforce because there was legislation that happened during President Trump's first administration. And it was directly for the VA employees. It was for whistleblower and employee accountability. And it basically lowered the standard on what is needed to fire someone in the VA. And what happened was that these employees that were fired fought back, filed lawsuits, and then some of them were reinstated and got back pay. Because they actually were found that they did not provide substantial documentation.
Right.
So this is what I'm feeling that might be happening again. I mean, those lawsuits in those cases, so many were won against the federal government that the VA actually stopped following that rule.
Right. Because they didn't want to have any more exposure to legal exposure.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was actually, that decision happened during the Biden administration, which they got a lot of flack for. But honestly, they had a lot of liability. So by any legal standpoint, I'm like, that kind of makes sense. But all of these layoffs and all of these things and other legislation that's being admitted in, to me, it's reminding me everything of that legislation that later caused so many court cases that reversed their actual movements. So I have a little bit of reservation on how much money will actually be saved until I see it play out in the judicial courts.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I was thinking about as you were speaking, there are several dimensions to that. So one is that you have an employee that's not being productive because you took them out of work. So that time period if it takes a year for you to go through the court proceeding, you've lost a year of productivity. So you're actually paying for something that we're not receiving. So that's a waste there. Then also, there's an illegal action occurring that's going to cause you to have, engagement with the legal system where you have to spend government money to defend the case. And then you're taking them away from other issues that may be important. And so as you're spiraling through the legal system, you're incurring all these costs. Plus you have to maybe pay the attorney's fees for the person who's the plaintiff. And so you're going through and you also have to pay the interest on the money that you haven't provided. So actually it's a loser. It's actually a big loss potentially. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And that's what happens when you make radical changes. It can cause some issues. So we'll see how those things plays out. And it just seems like the judicial system is going to be flooded. And it seems like a lot of these cases are going to be appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, because that's typically what's been happening with a lot of cases that President Trump's, hands have been on them. So that's something for us to watch out for and really try to see how that one's going to play out.
Yeah, that's interesting. And every system, as people are moving into the administration, I just want to see the best for the country. And there are going to be a lot of learning lessons, and, what we don't want to have is, a negative impact on citizens, on our veterans and that kind of thing as the process unfolds. But we have to make sure we're taking judicious steps to understand and to, have enough transparency to see what's happening so that we can make, they can make corrective actions as an administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a former federal employee, I actually was a supervisor. It's not that difficult to do the actual, I'm trying to think of the right words, the actual actions to move forward, at least keeping the person accountable and actually holding them to the standard, and then going through the procedure of letting them go. It's actually not that difficult. And so that's one of the things. But the thing is that a lot of people believe it's difficult. They think it's difficult, but it's not that difficult. It's pretty spelled out there, especially if you're a supervisor that has learned how to do the actual documentation. If you know how to do the documentation for performance standards, then you know how to do the documentation for, to letting somebody go, to actually trying to get them fired because they're not up to performance standards.
Yes, and one of the things that we talked about earlier, Stephanie, was, that the veterans who are participating in this are usually really highly motivated people. They are there to do a job, and we had, I'd mentioned that I saw one particular brief issue where one of the military personnel was fired while they were overseas being deployed, and that's against the, against really the law.
Right. Well, I haven't seen the confirmed. I haven't seen the confirmed story yet. So this is not a confirmed thing. I'm not confirming that this could happen, that this is actually happening, but it's something I can conceive to happen on radical moves of firing probationary employees.
Yes.
That is possible if it happens so fast. But yes, it is illegal to fire anyone who is on deployment orders, for any reason, even if it is technically for cause, and they actually found out that this person did something illegal on their job, then deployed. You can't actually fire the person until they come off of orders.
Yes.
So
and the VFW put some really good guidelines out about, the issue of, what do you do if you find yourself fired as a federal employee? And they were, looking at, because right now there's a lot of talk about probationary status versus permanent status. And they were telling people, a starting point would be determining how you're being classified on the SF50, so your form, standard form 50. And it sort of give sort of step-by-step guidelines. So people who are in this situation, the VFW is a good source, by, going to their website and looking at some of the suggestions they have, about, veterans' preference in layoffs and, being rehired. There was one thing I heard, that there was some discussion on one of the major news channels about people having difficulty being rehired after having that mark on their record of not having performance status, met the performance status. And
or that they were told, well, a lot of probationary employees were fired for performance without even having a performance evaluation on their record.
Right.
So that's one that I know is probably going to make it into the judicial courts. There have been a few states that actually have joined. I know Washington State joined the lawsuit most recently, and they have a lot of federal employees there. So I'm not surprised about that move whatsoever. But yes, it can be much more difficult. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know when they hear about these probationary fires is that they're thinking of just entry level. The thing is that if you're promoted as a federal employee, you could be put on a probationary period. So you could be a 12, 20-year federal employee, just got a promotion, had in the probationary period, and then fired.
Boy, that's a good point to make. Yeah.
Yes.
Because most people think this is a startup, a new person, right?
No, this could be people that have been actually working for the federal government for a number of years, but then they received a promotion.
Wow, that's a great point. Didn't realize that. Yeah.
You're losing experience because of that. And that can be very difficult. So This is going to be something to watch.
Yeah, and you were talking about the presidential talk, and how it really was not a State of the Union address, but a joint session.
Yes.
So maybe you can explain a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, State of the Union doesn't come in until a year being in. They're supposed to be doing it every year, or there's certain timeframes per the Constitution. And so it is basically a joint session address of both chambers of Congress. And it is somewhat perfectly timed because it's right before the Senate goes into their little recess that they have, their little like a spring break. Yeah. So, but yes, that's what he had done so that he can address everybody and talk about all of the movements that's been happening with DOJ and what all the executive orders that they signed, and to have some interesting conversation between the political parties. Yeah.
And some good things were pointed out. I wish that we had heard a little bit more about veterans in the talk.
Yeah, because there wasn't much.
Yeah.
No, there wasn't much at all. And there wasn't any mention about Social Security as well. One thing that most people don't know is that veterans are more likely to actually be on Social Security because they are more likely to be disabled. And there was no promise for cuts to Social Security programs. So that's one thing that a lot of people are marking out there as something, as a red flag for those people that are dependent on Social Security.
Oh, yes. And one of the things that it goes back to, Lyndon B. Johnson, when he passed the Social Security Act, and, it goes back, I think the first person to receive a card was a former president and his wife. The thing about that is that a lot of people don't realize that people who are in long-term care facilities or in nursing homes, that type of thing, Medicare does not cover that, but Medicaid does. Medicaid can cover that. And so if you get rid of Medicaid, you may be affecting people who are in long-term care settings, people who have disabilities that need that kind of care. So that's something that's going to be important. But we're running out of time. So as usual, Stephanie, every time we start talking, we run we run the clock faster than it should be going. But it has been incredible. Your insights have been really remarkable. I'm glad that we have your expertise on the show. So thank you, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you.
Market, advertise, and sponsor your business with Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelly and America's Heroes Group, where information and resources are intentionally disseminated via radio, print, and social media. Call our office for more details at 312-803-2618.
I'm Ken Jennings. All of us here at Jeopardy want to thank you for your service to our nation. We truly honor and appreciate you, and what's more, we're looking for contestants like you to play on our show. So head to Jeopardy.com now and take the Anytime test, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon right here on the Alex Trebek stage.
Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Hey there. Welcome to another show on America's Heroes Group. My name is Yvette Jones Swanson. I am the National Veterans Homeless Housing Advocate and Consultant nationwide. I said national, right? And I want to thank the America's Heroes Group and its founder, Cliff Kelly, for inviting me to this show. About 11 years ago, I contacted the show and introduced myself because somebody said, Yvette, you would be good on that show. So I had one time, and I'm like, look, I can't keep doing this because I'm busy housing homeless veterans, and I don't have time to be running and chasing behind anybody. So I just let it go. And in time, God said, okay, you're ready. You're ready. So in 22 years, I've housed over 5,000 homeless veterans, and not just me. I've created teams and I've taught people, leasing agents, a lot of them, along all of this time. Because housing that many people, it takes a village. It takes a lot. But you want to know something? Whenever I say I've housed over 5,000 unhoused homeless veterans, somebody who I trained, who was on my team, who worked in the offices I managed, said, Yvette, it was more than that. And it probably was, but I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating because, homeless veterans enter the military every day. They're released from the military every day. Some of them are discharged, not released. They're discharged homeless. Some of them are released from incarceration, homeless. Some are released from the hospital, homeless. We have homeless veterans who are living amongst us. And people say, how is that veterans are homeless and they live in our backyards? Well, yeah, they do, because simply they don't know how to access their benefits. So tonight we're going to talk about accessing that funding as a provider, as a housing provider. Now, as a I think we're having a storm. As a realtor, I knew, and I still know, where the money is to house unhoused homeless veterans. I know what agencies hold the bags to house these unhoused homeless veterans. Now, we're going to talk about how you can become one of those contracting agencies, how you can get some of that money to house these unhoused homeless veterans. Because as a realtor for 22 years, people always ask me, Derrick Green, how do you house homeless veterans? They don't have any money. So I'm going to have my guests, my esteemed guests, and new business. What are we? We're like business partners now. We're like the.
We said combined solutions between, yes.
Because you need the money in order to do your business. You need the money, right? You need the contract. So go ahead and introduce yourself, because I do have some very good questions for you to answer for our viewers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Derrick Green. A little bit about me. So the reason I'm on the show is because my area is the government contracting and procurement side of the house. Okay. When we say government contracting, what we're really saying is government acquisitions, government procurement. Potato means the same thing. Those words are used interchangeably. But so my background is I served in the executive channels and as a government contracting and procurement officer in the U.S. Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security under FEMA, Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, for 7 years in VA contracting. And then I left to learn the municipality side and did the same thing for the City of Houston Strategic Procurement Division as a procurement officer. So that being said, what that literally means is that I was the responsible executive for the team of professionals who create the evaluation criteria by which contracts are awarded. We choose which companies get those contracts, which essentially is funding. It's money.
Yeah,
It's
it's much.
it's money to do your thing in whichever sector of contracting you're in. And in this case, we're talking real estate. We're talking housing veterans and similar populations. Of course, veterans, they have to be troops first, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you said that. People have always asked me and wondered, how do I house homeless veterans? And the first thing they say is they don't have any money. They don't, what? They want to live here for free. So earlier we were talking about some areas in New Orleans. But let me ask you this first, because we'll get to that. My first question for you is, how can investors of real estate developers position their properties to attract government leasing contracts? And I'm glad hold on one second, one moment, because we didn't have this conversation yet, but I'm glad this question came up because I am in 2 national real estate investing companies. And one of them, it's both of them were actually 3. They're educational companies, and this is something we never talk about. So this will be introduced. Right. So I want you to answer that. How can investors of real estate or real estate developers position their properties to attract government contracts?
Well, first and foremost, one of the biggest aspects is this. So if we're talking from a standpoint of investors, the beautiful thing is, as an investor, you are literally the most flexible host. We always say the investor is the top of the food chain because you're not restricted to one area. Here's why that's good. Because every agency has their own unique criteria, right? So for example, as an investor, the best way you'd want to go about this is study the agency first and foremost. And when I say study, this doesn't mean read 20 paragraphs to develop a dissertation. No, it simply means find out what that agency is. For example, if it's the VA, what does that mean? They serve veterans, right? You know that they serve veterans. So think about the simple things. Think about your family members who are veterans, right? What do they usually need? What are the things they typically need to be comfortable as a veteran? Housing, supportive services, and the things that cater to whatever recourse they have as a result of being in service. Bam, that's your answer. So you want, and let me explain why. You want to acquire your property and set that property up to where it caters to the things that veterans typically need. How do you know what veterans need? How do you know what the VA wants? Think about all your cousins, your parents who served in the military. What does it typically take to accommodate them? And guess what? You even have a cheat sheet. It's on va.gov.
So
it's on va.gov.
Yeah, I hear some type of glitching.
Oh, let's see something. Is it like a computery?
No, it's just glitching, like I don't like a tapping sound.
Give me 1 second. Let me fix that. I think I know what it is.
Okay. So so he's having a little bit of technical. I'm looking around like, where is that sound coming from? But I'm so glad he's here because he's talking about, as an investor, as a developer, as someone who buys real estate and want to do some type of veterans housing, you're going to need to have money to do that. So So you answered question number 9, and for those who are just joining, please feel free to go back and listen to Derrick Green's response to this question. How can investors or real estate developers position their properties to attract government leasing contracts? Let me tell you something. I have been doing this for years. For years. I've been a consultant with, I've had over 2,000 investors and property owners, property management companies. I've got beautiful letters written from all of these owners of multi-unit properties. And I could tell you all the properties that I would mention and tell these investors what to buy in order to position themselves to receive not a contract that they've had to go on sam.gov and get, but how to receive the money from the contractors who have the funding. So, and let's go on to our next question. How does the federal government decide which properties or businesses get awarded leasing contracts?
Now, the good thing about, I'm glad you asked that question, because that goes back to the evaluation criteria and competitive range. So let's talk evaluation criteria and how that connects to the question, right? So they're gonna, first and foremost, the good thing is they already have their cheat sheets out there. So for example, we know that everything the government does typically, in not all cases, but a lot of times moves through sam.gov, right? So sam.gov typically will provide you with solicitations. Now, some of those solicitations may not even be available. However, even though they're expired, they are still there to give you the line items. And those line items, it's going to be your basic things in terms of how the facilities should look, in terms of, the things that you think about the things, if you know someone who's been in the military, right?
Yeah.
Think about barracks. If you're talking about co-living, think about barracks. If you're talking about, if you're talking about independent living, then you want to think about government leased housing, which could come in the form of apartment living or individual homes in one subdivision. Here's why I say that. The VA typically wants to mirror their independent living situations to mirror that of active duty troops as much as possible. So it's literally that simple. So you go to sam.gov, you marry that together with what's on the agency's website, and it's gonna let you know. But last but not least, it ties right back into the initial question that you asked. It's about understanding the unique needs of that agency. For example, so we talked about VA, right? Now let's talk about Department of Defense real quick. If we can segue there just for a second, right? So when soldiers move, right? When soldiers move, when Marines move, when airmen move, when sailors move, right? And the Space Force people, all right? For if you're into that, right? Like anyway, I don't really know what they do yet. I'm still learning, but I'm from the old 5 branch military. So, but anyway, but so anyway, right? That's just me being goofy. But the Department of Defense, remember, they have what's called government leased housing, right? So you have troops who typically want the privileges of living on base, but they don't want that base life. But at the same time, they also don't want to have to pay their own bills. So they want the freedom of living off base, but they also want a lot of the privileges that comes with living in on-base housing. And especially if you're talking about the troops who move to places like Houston, for example, they get sent somewhere like Houston, where I'm at, which has no real military bases, right? So government leased housing is basically a situation where the government will come and say, okay, you know what?
we want to go ahead and put out a procurement for an entire building or an entire subdivision. Now, understanding what they want, once again, you go back to that agency. You think about, what does that agency serve? You know, think about the conveniences that you'd want as an active duty person, right? Who could potentially have to be deployed sometimes. You want everything to be convenient. You almost want it cookie cutter. That's your
Yep.
clue. So guess what? Veterans typically want the same thing, but the government's going to give it to them probably at a probably at a much slightly lower level. That's a little more cost efficient, because at this point they're not on active duty anymore, and we want them to be able to transition back into living on their own. Therefore, we're going to give them some of those cookie cutter military convenience things, but at a little lesser level. So that's the clue right there. So the answer to that would be, do your research, right? And then the next step will be, find out who those acquisition officers are.
Okay, hold on, because we only have a certain amount of time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right?
Yeah. They can reach out to us for those other details.
Exactly. So I think I typed in, it didn't go through.
And we have a question too. We have a question.
Yeah, I see it. So is there a certain certificate that I must have in order to get awarded contracts? So I was alluding to that question that I put in the comments that didn't go through. That's a loaded question that requires an appointment. So email me, and then I'll put you in touch with Derrick, because it involves both of us. It involves both of us. It involves his specialty in contracts and procurement, and it involves my specialty in veterans housing. So it depends on, what do you want to do? What type of housing? And then that's with me. But with Derrick, you have to get these, you have to get in the SAMS.gov, and all of this is a process. So that's not a yes or no or an easy question to answer, because it's a lot. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
and typically, typically people hire consultants to do that upfront work. And that's what we do.
It's situational. It's definitely situational.
Yes, that's a good word. So let's go to, it's raining here. Question number 10. And this is going right into this question. What's one thing you wish every business owner knew before trying to win a government contract?
The importance, what I wish they knew is the importance of having a project manager on their team who has already operated in the space of procurement and contracting, or I'm gonna say, and this the SSVF space, supportive services for veterans and families. But when I say that, let me clarify that statement. That doesn't mean the agencies who are, that doesn't mean the SSVF companies. I'm talking about the people who serve as the bridge to help make that happen. The person between the veteran, the VA, and the SSVF agencies. Basically, pretty much Yvette Jones Swanson.
Right.
You want that person on your team.
Yes. That's why I'm over here smiling, because agencies don't know. And agencies need an Yvette Jones Swanson on their team. On the agencies that receive the SSVF funding, I know who they all are here in Illinois. That's how I'm able to house all of these veterans, because I know where the bag is. I know they'll call me and say that I've got veterans, 5 of them who need housing. Send them my way. They're bringing money, and I know where the investors are who have these units available and who said yes to any of my clients that I'm bringing their way, because I'm bringing them the bag. I'm bringing them the money from the SSVF organizations that have the contracts that Derrick helps you get as a business owner. And now you need a veteran to use that money on, because you have to use it or you're going to lose it. And don't
Mm-hmm.
misappropriate the money, because I've seen several agencies get shut down because they've misappropriated the money in a
Mm-hmm.
nice word.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. That's all I
Yep.
had to say.
Yep.
But
Yep. That's right.
but
That
one
is
other
absolutely
thing,
right.
one other thing you mentioned is the VA likes to mirror for us as veterans communities that we're accustomed to living in on base. So what I've been doing for the past 10 years, I've been designing veteran villages.
And
I've set my veteran village plans in front of mayors and state representatives who all love the idea, who all want to see it come to fruition. So we're bringing back Pembroke Hopkins Park, and that's an original underground slave hideaway for
mm-hmm.
for our ancestors who were running away, and they homesteaded that area, and it was beautiful farmland all back in the day. They were
Mm-hmm.
Pembroke Hopkins Park. They were growers of hemp. So they were one of the largest hemp producers in World War II. So now we're looking to build 60 single family homes for 55 and over veteran community that mirrors
Mm-hmm.
where we used to be on base. We didn't have to go anywhere.
And I'm gonna tell you, just by saying, anybody who tuned in and heard that, I just thought about something. We just gave somebody the keys that everybody who's looking to do what they're doing don't have. Because see, what I've done my research. Most of the people who have these veteran homes, who say they want to house veterans, they
Right.
don't even understand to think like that. And guess what? The VA is not going to tell you. SSVF company's not going to tell you. They're just going to send people where, if there's an available space. But that's the key. That's the difference. And I hope everybody's hearing what I'm saying. I'm gonna tell y'all as much as I can tell you without you getting a consultation. But that's the key. There's a difference between people who have apartments and spaces that get veterans sent there individually through SSVF versus you being able to contract a whole building to the government. That's the difference.
Right. That's the difference.
A lot of people wonder why they can't do that. The reason they can't do that is because the federal agency does not want to have to tell you that you have to think on that level of providing them with something that mirrors a military style framework. They don't want to have to tell you that. But because that means that it wasn't already in, that means you haven't done the research to even care enough about how the veterans are living. You just want the money. But if
Exactly.
you show up already thinking like that, let's give them something cookie cutter that gives them that comfort of active duty. That signals the agency they actually have the veteran in mind.
Yes.
So we're not just going to put them on that list to send veterans individually. Let's just go ahead and consider contracting that whole building. We give them an overall blanket lease, and we rotate the veterans for them, or the
Exactly.
soldiers for them, for government lease housing.
Exactly.
That's the difference. But I think I'm giving too much right now.
You know what? You can give all you can, because who can do that without you? Who can't? Because there's steps and layers to getting
Plenty.
there. So please, you can say it all day long, each step and layer. But Kate, let me tell you, it would take a genius to do all of those individual layers.
And that's why we have National Veteran Homeless Housing Coordinators. Excuse me, National Veterans Homeless Housing Coordinators and contractors. She's both, right? National Veteran Homeless Housing Contractor and Coordinator. And that's why we have CPPOs. For those of you who don't know, CPPO means Certified Public Procurement Officer.
Yes.
That means that I was on the side, one of the decision makers in terms of who gets awarded contracts.
Yes.
Before I decided to build my own company that's on the receiving end of that same mechanism. So that's why you need an Yvette Jones Swanson. That's why you need a Derrick Green, because we're gonna teach you how to understand, not just to go after the money, but to have the right heart, because you can go after the money and get it. But if you want to get it to the level to where you get one of those 15, 20-year leases, ongoing building leases with the federal government.
Yeah. Then you're going to need a Derrick Green who knows how to submit and guide you through what you need to do in order to get these contracts. And before it's too late, let me just tell you, we were talking about New Orleans, and because that's where he assisted three contractors in winning $1 million contracts. So we're talking about the contractors here in New Orleans. One of them is Hope Center Incorporated. They received $3,436,180. Then he said, "Oh, Yvette, I know Start Corporation." Well, Start, you can't see it, but Start Corporation is right here, New Orleans, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, and some other counties in there, whatever they're called.
And I didn't tell Yvette how I know Start Corporation. Well, go ahead.
Okay. We're gonna have to resume this.
I told you that I know, but I didn't tell you how I know them.
Well, let me just tell them how much they received on their government contract for veterans housing. All of these contractors that received $3.2 billion for September through October of 2025, Start Corporation received $1,807,402. And we have a couple minutes before we have to sign off here. But Derrick, how do you know Start Corporation? I want to know too.
Because when I had to transition back to New Orleans from DC, I was homeless. That's how I know. And guess what?
What?
You know why the government likes them? Because they're not hard to find.
Oh.
When I went, I'll never forget it. I was couch surfing because couch surfers are part of the homeless population.
Well, yeah. They don't have a lease. We didn't have a lease.
Yep, I was couch surfing, and so I got up about 5 o'clock every morning, just going to downtown New Orleans with I'm talking broke, probably $5 to my name, with a suit and a tie and some resumes in my hand, and stopping at every agency. Hey, do y'all know what the veteran support agencies are? I'm seeing it on my phone, but I'm not exactly understanding what suite is in. They threw that name out there so fast. They said, "Oh, you didn't know? You ever heard of Start Corp?" They call them Start Corp.
Yeah.
They said, "Yeah, everybody knows Start Corp." So what that lets me know, these people love veterans so much that they're getting out there making themselves known. They're connecting with pastors. They're connecting with city leaders, community leaders. And I'm giving y'all more free game right there. So I'm gonna shut up.
Yes. So I've got from A to Z, A to W, all the agencies, all the SSVF organizations that received the $3.2 billion nationwide. And I have access to all of those. We both do. So if there's anybody here listening, you want to open any type of veterans housing in any city, any state, we can help navigate that journey for you. That's what we do. You need the money, you need Derrick Green. You need to know where to get these veterans from who are coming with the bag. You need to know an Yvette Jones. It's this way. We'll do it that way.
Oh, that's what's doing?
That's what I was doing.
My thing got me doing like that.
Right. Am I pointing to you? Or do I gotta go that way?
I do like that.
You need a Derrick Green.
Yep.
Thank y'all so much for watching.
So you're on my other left. Okay.
On the other left, right.
Connect,
so we look, catch us again and replay this video because you're gonna need it.
Voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Market, advertise, and sponsor your business with Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelly and America's Heroes Group, where information and resources are intentionally disseminated via radio, print, and social media. Call our office for more details at 312-803-2618.
I'm Ken Jennings. All of us here at Jeopardy want to thank you for your service to our nation. We truly honor and appreciate you, and what's more, we're looking for contestants like you to play on our show. So head to Jeopardy.com now and take the Anytime test, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon right here on the Alex Trebek stage.
Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. I'm your host, U.S. Army Combat Medic and Flight Surgeon, Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, U.S. Army National Guard retired. We have a guest speaker tonight that is really phenomenal. I've read her articles before, and you are not going to be disappointed one bit. But we have the KFF, Kaiser Family Foundation Health News guest panelist, senior correspondent, Julie Appleby. KFF is an independent source for policy research, polling, and journalism. The topic tonight is something that's really critically important. When I read this article, it really became a really insightful point of, as being a veteran, what people are telling me and whether I can rely on what people are telling me, and how careful I have to be in what I'm hearing. But the topic is the bill that Congressman says protects Medicaid doesn't, and would likely require cutting it. So welcome. I couldn't be happier to have you on the show to talk about this topic. It's so important for people to hear this, Julie, and to understand what is going on in the background. So I'm glad you did this investigation.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yes, this was an article we did for PolitiFact, and that's a fact-checking website. You might have seen it. It's online. Yeah. They check the accuracy of claims by elected officials and others, and they have this thing called a truthometer, and that meter has a variety of rankings. So it goes from, a statement is true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, or pants on fire. So editors decide what level of the rating to give. So I, as a reporter, would look into a statement, and that's what we did here. We took a statement that Representative Nick LaLota, who represents part of Long Island, he posted a video for his constituents explaining his position. And this was a February 25th vote on a budget resolution that passed the House. And he said in his video that I voted yes on a budget resolution that protects Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid while cutting some spending elsewhere. Now, because much of his video kind of focused on Medicaid, this PolitiFact article did as well. So we didn't really touch on the other areas, Social Security and Medicare, really. We looked at Medicaid. So that's what this article is about.
Okay. And what was the finding, the PolitiFact finding?
Yeah. So ultimately, we, in consultation with the editors, both at my place at KFF Health News and at PolitiFact, we ran over the evidence and we looked at what people were saying in my reporting, and we decided to rate the statement as false. And there's a lot of nuances, to that decision.
Yeah. So let's back up a bit. What is a budget resolution? I mean, why is it so important?
Yeah, good question. So budget resolutions are not a law, but it's rather sort of like a blueprint for guiding lawmakers on budget-related legislation. So the House passed this resolution, and it was approved by 217 Republicans voting for it and 214 Democrats voting against it, and one Republican was also against it. So it's just one part of the budget process. So the House passes its, what it wants to see, the spending levels it wants to see, and directs lawmakers to try to find those cuts. The Senate has something similar. Then they have to agree on them. So this is still an ongoing situation, but this is the budget resolution that passed the House. And it aims to cut spending because there is an effort by the Trump administration to cut spending and to try to cut the national debt. Now, the national debt and the deficit. The debt is the total amount of money that a country owes, while a deficit occurs when the government spending exceeds the revenue in a given year. So that's kind of the mix behind this. So the resolution tells lawmakers basically, we want some spending cuts in these areas.
See. Yeah, but what would they have to cut to get, because I think that resolution was calling for $880 billion. I can't even think in those terms. That much money.
A lot of money. That's a lot of money. Yeah. This particular resolution seeks spending across a whole range of areas, but the one we're focused on here specifically asks the House Committee on Energy and Commerce to submit proposals to reduce the deficit by not less than $880 billion for fiscal years 2025 through 2034. So this is the resolution that Representative Lilota and the other Republicans approved in February. So the section that he references for this $880 billion in spending reductions, and it's basically telling them to find legislation to achieve these kinds of spending reductions, is 32 words long. So, and those 32 words don't mention Medicaid at all. It doesn't say it would protect Medicaid. It doesn't mention Medicaid at all. And it doesn't prescribe any specific action on the program. But lawmakers are likely to do certain things, like a lot of discussion, and including the representative in this video talks about some things they could do, like instituting work requirements for Medicaid recipients. So then lawmakers would separately draft this legislation to make these program adjustments. But you asked a very good question. So how do you get to that $880 billion? That's a lot of money. So policy experts and the Congressional Budget Office, which is a group that analyzes legislation and says how much things will cost, they said that if you take Medicare off the table, because President Trump and others have said that they're not going to touch Medicare, Social Security, and President Trump has also said he doesn't want to touch Medicaid. But if you took Medicaid out of the bargain, you got to remember, Energy and Commerce oversees Medicaid and Medicare. But if you take Medicare, I'm sorry, I misspoke. If you take Medicare out of the equation, there's not enough left under the rest of the committee's jurisdiction to make these kinds of cuts unless they substantially reduce Medicaid spending. And that's where this gets very interesting, because they oversee about $8.8 trillion in spending under the committee's purview over that 10-year period. And Medicaid alone accounts for $8.2 trillion, or 93% of that money. So one of the people that I spoke with was actually a person from KFF Health News. And she said, KFF, the policy program, said that even if the committee eliminated all of the non-Medicaid and non-Medicare spending, they would still have to cut. If they eliminated everything else under their purview, they would still have to cut Medicaid by well over $700 billion. So they could eliminate everything else from their committee's jurisdiction and then still have to make a lot of Medicaid cuts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's almost 880 billion is almost 1 trillion, right? And you're talking about 8.8 trillion total and 8.2 trillion. That's 93% of that. That math doesn't add up.
Right.
You end up with 0.6. So 0.6 billion. $600 billion. When you're just trying to cut 880 billion, it doesn't add up. So just the math needs to be looked at. But what did the congressman say?
There's a lot of zeros there. What did he say?
A lot of zeros there.
Yeah, a lot of zeros there. Yeah, we always ask in PolitiFact pieces, we always go to the source and say, hey, what did you base your statement on? What kind of statistics or whatever can you give us? What's your response? So we asked his office for that, and they did write us back. They sent us a statement from him. and this is a direct quote. He said that the budget resolution makes no cuts to those programs, meaning Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. But he said, rather, quote, it opens the door to protect Medicaid with common sense solutions which ensure its availability for those Americans who qualify, including, he said, the removal of illegals, and that was his term, from the rolls, work requirements for able-bodied adults, and the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse. So that's what he said, that this ultimately, this will protect Medicaid in his mind through those actions.
Yeah, one of the fears I have about this, because I was the director for the Illinois Department of Public Health, so I'm familiar with Medicare, Medicaid, and those kinds of expenditures. And one of the things that people have to realize is that Medicaid, most of the money from Medicaid is covering people who are senior citizens who are in long-term care facilities or nursing homes, and also people with disabilities. Many of our veterans came back with one arm, missing one leg, both legs. They actually had to go through VOC programs, to get rehab in order to do anything, right? And the thing that really disturbs me is if you cut Medicaid, this is the lifeblood for these people in order for them to even exist, And they were talking about work requirements too, and how are you going to get a work requirement from someone who is with Alzheimer's disease in a nursing home? I mean, it's just it's unimaginable to me how you could put those requirements in that type of situation where most of the money that's from Medicaid is actually going to that particular group of people. And so there's some nuances in here that are really very, very scary. And if you say that those people who are in nursing homes don't deserve it, don't require it, or involved with fraud, waste, and abuse, I'm very scared about what's going to happen on a human level, to people who are dependent on these programs. And
I think, yeah, it really depends what the lawmakers decide, how they decide, first of all, if these cuts go through as written, right? So, and then how they would try to achieve them. So, and as you pointed out, Medicaid is huge. Medicaid helps pay for health and long-term care for 83 million low-income people in the United States. So it's one-fifth of healthcare spending, and more than half of the spending for long-term care, the seniors and others who are in long-term care. And it's a large share of state budgets. It's often the first or second biggest part of the budget behind schools sometimes, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's the biggest part. So it's a big chunk of spending. It's a federal state program. The feds give the states money, and it's based on this complicated formula, et cetera, et cetera. And the states get to decide a lot of ways who they're going to cover, what they're going to cover. There's mandatory populations, and then there's less mandatory, and there's the group that was expanded by the Affordable Care Act into Medicaid eligibility are low-income adults without dependent children. There are still, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact number. I think it's about a dozen, it might only be 11 states that haven't expanded Medicaid to that population. So for that population, they can have no income. They can be very, very poor and not qualify for Medicaid unless they meet another part of the program's requirements, like they maybe they're pregnant or they have dependent children. So those are the folks that were in the expansion program. But a lot of states do cover them. A lot of states cover adults that don't have kids, and that's where you start hearing about this work requirement situation where they want everybody to be working, and they often point that out. Now, fact is, most people on Medicaid already have jobs. So the savings, I think somebody told me the savings, if they put in work requirements, would really only about 100 million. So that's still not going to get you to the $880 billion. So it was about 100 billion. So it wouldn't save enough money. But this program covers children, pregnant women, adults with children, seniors in nursing homes, and veterans. Veterans can be eligible for Medicaid coverage if they meet their state's income and resource requirements. So it covers a very broad swath of America. And I think the polls show that it's pretty popular. And I think there are already people very worried about what this might mean. So what might this mean? So they could maybe put work requirements in, but it's not going to yield that level of savings. And it and other cuts have been suggested. So some of the Republicans have suggested maybe capping federal spending per enrollee, like say, we'll give your state X amount per enrollee, and that's it. Instead of this more complicated formula based on spending and enrollment numbers, or reduce the federal matching dollars. Instead of giving you, a 50% match or a 60% match, we'll make a lower match, or eliminating some ways that states raise money to help pay for their share of the program. But all of these things could force states to maybe cut spending, right? If they can't come up with some other way to offset these types of cuts, or find new revenue sources. Maybe they would need to find other, I don't know, taxes or other ways to raise money if they wanted to keep their Medicaid programs without reducing benefits for enrollees. So these are all the things that could possibly happen, depending on whether that a dollar amount stays the same, and then what kind of legislation the lawmakers pass to try to achieve it.
Yes, that's very, very insightful. And one of the fears too is that you're talking about the Medicaid for people who are already working. It's almost like it's supplementing them to give them the ability to live and to thrive, right, and to have their family taken care of, and that. So it's really, many people are working on minimum wage. They're very low income jobs, but they're still working, and that is something that I'd rather put my money into that family than into a Tesla. But I'm not going to go, and that's too far into that extreme. But I think that this is something that's really the undergird of what it means to be an American citizen, to take care of the people who are here. That's really what our Constitution was founded upon. That there are checks and balances, between the first, second, and third article, from the, for Congress, president, and the, judicial body, the Supreme Court. But they need to really start looking at this and making sure that people are protected. And there are reasons why, things can't be passed that are unconstitutional. That the separation of powers exists for a reason, for a balance, so that no particular group has so much power it can become a dictator or a king of England, right? To upset the living conditions of the people who are in the country. So I think people have to really understand what's going on. And so, so what was the why was it rated as false? The statement that was made by Senator Lakota.
Well, there were a number of reasons. First of all, it wouldn't actually, there's no wording in it that actually protects the Medicaid program. It doesn't say, oh yeah, but you got to protect X, Y, and Z parts of Medicaid. Right. So that was the main reason. There are also other nuances. Representative Lolota said he was working to protect the program, and he suggested that undocumented people were swelling the rolls, which is also not correct. The states, a number of states, including New York, for example, offer coverage to children or adults regardless of their immigration status, but they can only use state money to pay for such programs. So states cannot use federal funding to cover undocumented immigrants. So removing them won't do anything for these deficit reduction targets. So that was another part of the thought process that went in here that's not exactly correct. He also wanted the work requirements, as we mentioned. And again, that's not going to quite get the savings that this would call for. So then it would require other cuts by the states. So I think the bottom line is the math doesn't add up, as you said earlier. To cut $880 billion from that committee's jurisdiction without affecting Medicaid's funding substantially is not correct. And then states and others would have to make some decisions that would likely mean cutting benefits or finding other ways to raise revenue or affecting state budgets negatively. So those are all things that went into the decision-making process on this.
Yeah, and you made one comment there. It was an article is really good. I encourage people to read your articles, not just this one, but all of them. But this one is really salient. but you were mentioning that the states cannot use federal funding to cover undocumented immigrants from one of the contributors, Burns. But that was really an interesting statement because that sort of has something to do with the deficit reduction.
Right. Well, that's correct. They because states have to use if they the handful of states that do cover undocumented immigrants in Medicaid need to use state money. They can't use federal money. So if this effort, which it is, the House budget resolution is aimed at cutting federal spending. It's not going to cut federal spending if those states stopped providing coverage to the undocumented because they're using state funds already. So let's back up just a little bit. So in general, undocumented immigrants are largely not eligible for federally funded programs like Medicaid, but there are a few exceptions for things like emergency services. And then, like I mentioned, these certain state funded programs. So there are some emergency programs, like maybe somebody giving birth that would be covered, but not in general. In general, most undocumented immigrants are not eligible for Medicaid.
Yes. And then, there's one other thing that was really interesting. It was really there was an opposition to Medicaid cuts that happened before. And that was,
right.
In 2017, you were mentioning the
That's
Affordable Care
right.
Act.
That's right. I think that shows that people were, the lawmakers were very concerned about what it might mean if they cut Medicaid. So this was back in 2017. There was an attempt. Remember, there was an attempt to repeal. There were many attempts, but one of the attempts to appeal the Affordable Care Act. There were some significant cuts to Medicaid in that proposal, and then it got voted down. And I think that some folks now think that might happen again here because Medicaid is a very important part of a lot of districts, especially right now. There are a lot of Republican-leaning districts where there are a lot of people on Medicaid. And so these lawmakers know that. They know their constituents are relying on this program. So I think it makes it challenging for them to do drastic cuts. So perhaps this budget number will be moderated, and or we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But yes, definitely back in 2017, that was one of the reasons why that repeal and replace thing on the Affordable Care Act did not pass.
That's really interesting because, with the timing of it, because we're, moving towards the 2026, midterms, and, this legislation and things that are being decided right now are happening at lightning speed. Sometimes with a sledgehammer. I haven't seen too many scalpels, but that may be something that legislators have to be careful about because they're going to directly affect the lives of their constituency.
Right, and they're going to hear from them. I think that some of the folks I interviewed said that lawmakers already are hearing from people who are very worried about their parents in a nursing home. Is that funding going to continue? What might happen to these programs? What might happen to other things like that? Now, remember I mentioned the expanded eligibility for Medicaid, and this allowed a number of people who weren't eligible before to qualify. Those very folks that were below the poverty level in some cases, or very, very low income, couldn't qualify before. Now they are, but if the number of states, I'm blanking on the number, I could look it up, but half dozen or so, maybe 9, maybe a half dozen or so, have trigger rules that if the federal government reduces the matching rate that it pays for those expanded eligible people, they will automatically just drop they would cut off they would go back to the old eligibility. It's like, if you lower the amount we're paying, we're not going to do it anymore. So that could cut people off as well. If lawmakers decide that they're going to reduce the matching rate to the states for this expanded population, those programs could go away in a number of states.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting to me is that as we're, as laws are being passed and we're asked to pay taxes and, pay into a system, it's because we have met our side of a bargain or an agreement. that, we have paid our taxes into this system for a particular purpose. And, that may be, supporting Medicaid and then Medicare. And we're actually getting money, automatically withdrawn from our checks, for those services. And it's almost like you're breaking the contract with the American people. And, one of the things that was mentioned in the article about, that Medicare is generally considered a third rail because of its beneficiaries, a powerful voting bloc. And that is something that I think I'm hoping that people sort of wake up and are informed about what exactly is happening. Another thing that's really not happening is the transparency. We don't really know what is being done in these agencies and departments. We had 300 people let go from, I think, the Center for Medicaid Services, CMS.
That was just the last couple of days. Yeah.
Services.
Yeah. Yep. CMS is a part of Health and Human Services, and the Trump administration is aiming to cut 10,000 jobs from Health and Human Services. And underneath that is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which oversees Medicare and Medicaid, right? So 300 people were cut already this week from those programs. And some of these are folks that are helping people that have problems with their enrollment in like Affordable Care Act. And so they help them. Maybe there's been a snafu or something happened with their coverage and they need help sorting it out more than just the federal marketplace can help with. So then they're transferred over to these folks that help resolve those kinds of problems. And some of those people are now being laid off. So there are some changes like that. Now, again, lawmakers and including President Trump have said that they are not going to touch Medicare and Medicaid, but it's some of these behind the scenes support services. While it's not directly cutting a benefit, it's cutting the people that help you if you have a problem with your benefit.
Yes, that's really important. And it's, I won't see a parallel here. Most of the federal agencies, one of the big findings from almost every agency that's in the federal government is that we don't have enough people working right now. We need to hire, and they've been hiring freezes for certain positions that have gone unfilled for years sometimes in some of the agencies. But there's also a I'm correlating this with Medicare, Medicaid, in that the states themselves said that there wasn't enough coverage. So we had Medicare, Medicaid, the expansion programs, right, where we actually extended them and made it more, more solvent, putting more money into it so that it could actually do what it's supposed to do. And in the federal government, doesn't really give out Medicare and Medicaid money. It's the states, it's sort of delegated to the states, where the states are the ones that provide the funds, directly to people. So I'm wondering, is anyone looking at, how those will affect certain states? There are states that did not have expansion, that did not go into the expansion prospect. So people were actually suffering a little bit more in those states where they knew they needed more money to have things, medical care, access to care, those kinds of things. And now this is going to be even cutting off that lifeline that wasn't really there.
Right. It's going to affect different states in different ways. And, each state's going to have to try to figure out if these cuts go through, what they're going to do with their own budgets and how they're going to try to make up the difference.
Yeah. So we have 1 minute to go, less than a minute to go. I'm hearing the music in the background, but Julie, I could talk to you all night long with this about these issues because you are really knowledgeable on this. I just wanted to say, reporters are getting a lot of pushback and evil things said about them. I'm just happy as an American citizen, as a veteran, to have a reporter like you that's out there trying to inform us. And that First Amendment right, I'm so glad that you are a proponent of it.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate talking with you.
Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Market, advertise, and sponsor your business with Vietnam veteran Cliff Kelly and America's Heroes Group, where information and resources are intentionally disseminated via radio, print, and social media. Call our office for more details at 312-803-2618.
Ken Jennings. All of us here at Jeopardy want to thank you for your service to our nation. We truly honor and appreciate you, and what's more, we're looking for contestants like you to play on our show. So head to Jeopardy.com now and take the Anytime test, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon right here on the Alex Trebek stage.
Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally. Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. I'm your host, U.S. Army Combat Medic and Flight Surgeon Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, U.S. Army National Guard retired. We have a guest speaker tonight, David Milinek, an extraordinary financial expert. He actually is just finishing up with a client, will be with us very shortly, but he's going to be talking to us about April's tax filing deadline. Now, I'm not sure about you, but with all the stuff going on in Washington, D.C., with cuts that being made to different agencies, I am not sure of where I am. I have still am putting my taxes together to file them. I know some people have filed early because they're worried about whether we have enough personnel, in the government to actually file and to process our taxes in a timely manner and in a correct manner. That's going to be a pretty big strain if they are removing people who normally help prepare our taxes and to distribute them in a timely manner. So we also have, the advent of things coming on with how to spend our money, how we should be thinking about spending our money from a taxing perspective, because now we're facing potential tariffs, maybe higher prices for items like homes and cars, things that are coming down the road. And it's going to be important for us to make sure that we are walking down the right financial path as we're preparing for next year's taxes and reflection on this past year and what we should be doing to make sure these taxes are done in a timely manner and a correct manner. The tax laws also sometimes change as time goes on, and they can have implications for what you're doing. So we have David Milinek, an extraordinary financial expert who's going to help us with some of those issues. April's tax filing deadline is approaching, and we're talking about reflection on 2024, but we have 2025 coming up, so maybe he can give us a bird's eye view of what the future looks like in a very chaotic.
What the future looks like for taxes? Oh, I could not tell you. I couldn't tell you what the future looks like for anything related to government right now. The only thing I can really be comfortable commenting on right now is that we are coming up very close on the 2024 filing deadline for individuals. Mm-hmm. And it is very important that you make sure you get your filing in on time. And if you don't have your paperwork together and you don't feel like you have all the documentation you need to report everything correctly on your taxes, there is actually an automatic 6-month extension that is available to all taxpayers just by simply filing a form. There is actually no downside to having that extension filed. At Katz-Milanick, we actually automatically file extensions for all of our clients once they have been a client with us for at least 1 year. And the reason for that is there are 2 benefits to filing an extension for a taxpayer and 0 downsides. The 2 benefits are that you get an additional 6 months to file your original tax return timely, and also you get 6 additional months to file an amended return timely. So if you file a return and then you realize that you didn't include something and you could get an even bigger refund, you have an additional 6 months down the road to go back and file that claim and get the additional money back from the IRS. If anyone out there needs help with any of that, please feel free to give us a call, 708-914-8220. Again, 708-914-8220. And to expound on that point about if you don't have all of your documents, there are times and situations where for some reason a taxpayer has difficulty with or cannot, for some reason or another, get a document that is required for them to file their return. In those situations, we can file with the IRS something called a power of attorney. Now, I don't want anyone to panic when I say that. That doesn't mean that we can go take your bank accounts and take your money and everything like that. It means that we can represent you before the IRS, and it means that we can also get any information, including information returns that were filed under your Social Security number that the IRS has from the IRS. We can obtain that information. So if you're having difficulty getting a document for whatever reason, we can help you with that, and we can then help you file a correct and appropriate tax return.
Oh, fantastic. I was sort of kidding around about the future, but do you see any, have you seen any problems with people filing so far, as far as the, return timeframes and that kind of thing, or
that's the biggest problem that I've actually noticed is I've had a lot of people reporting to me that despite the fact that we had filed for them 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, they haven't received the refund. So I don't know what's causing that, but that is currently the biggest issue that I am aware of.
Yeah. For veterans, what do you think? Is there anything special that veterans need to consider when filing taxes? Is there anything, that...
Okay. So there are a few things. One is that so the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 removed the moving expenses deduction for most taxpayers. So in other words, you used to, if you moved, let's say from New York to California, basically you moved over 50 miles from where you lived before, and you did that to move for a new job, more or less. You would be eligible to deduct all the expenses involved in your move from your AGI on your tax return.
Okay.
Now most taxpayers don't have that available to them. However, the deduction was preserved for veterans. So if you are a veteran who had to move and incurred costs, you still can claim that deduction. Additionally, veterans in certain states are eligible to receive reductions in in their taxable income or have tax credits just for being veterans. So, like, for example, in Indiana, there is a deduction of $5,000 just for you got your wages from the military. Wow. And so another thing that I'll point out here is I know a lot of veterans are small business owners, and I know the Office of Veteran Affairs is very encouraging of former vets to become business owners. And they have a lot of programs for that, VOSB programs and everything. For those veterans out there that own a small business, really, or anybody who owns a small business, there is a tax credit in the state of Illinois specifically, and I bring this up because our firm is based in Illinois. In the state of Illinois, and I think this tax program exists in other states as well, but I'm not as familiar with the mechanisms in those other states. But the tax credit is it's called the Angel Investment Credit. And what it does is a business has to get certified with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Once the business gets certified, they can then seek out an investor. That investor can invest as little as $10,000 and as much as $2 million. Wow. For every dollar the investor invests, that investor will they'll have to apply to the Department of Commerce and Economic Employment Opportunity as well to get the credit. But once they apply and get the credit, they're eligible for a credit of up to 25% of whatever they invest, or if it is specifically what's called a set-aside business, which is a business that's owned by a minority, a disabled person, a woman, I believe also, or a veteran, it is a 35% credit. So, so for someone who has money to invest, and I know there are other veterans out there who have money to invest, if they wanted to invest in a business and potentially receive some cash flow from that, they would be able to not only receive that cash flow from that, but also effectively completely eliminate their state tax obligation for multiple years.
Wow.
let's say we invest $2 million and we get a 35% credit. That means we have a $700,000 tax credit from the state of Illinois, and we have 5 years to write that off on our tax returns.
5 years. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and these are just a few of the strategies that we can employ to help you grow a business, keep as much of the money in that business as possible, and help you to then be able to take that money out of the business and turn it into wealth for you and your family. I'm sure everyone out there is interested in that. Mm-hmm. Please give us a call, 708-914-8220. Again, 708-914-8220.
Yeah, this is why I was saying that you're an extraordinary financial expert, because, when people look at people and, in your field, they look at you and say, oh, he just does taxes. But it's more than taxes. It's really understanding financial literacy and understanding how to apply those principles so that your taxes are not a problem.
Yeah, filling out the tax forms is not that valuable of a service. Quite frankly, you give me someone who's high school educated and has a reasonable amount of intelligence, I could teach him in 2 weeks how to fill out a tax return. It's not that valuable of a skill. And accordingly, on the market, it's not compensated that highly. The real value and the real value that we provide is in consulting with small businesses, consulting with individuals, helping them figure out how to plan for their goals. First of all, helping them figure out what their goals are, because in some cases people come in and say, I have $300,000 and no idea what to do with it. I have had people say that to me before. Mm-hmm. And so my response has to be, okay, here are some options.
Right.
Then obviously that person has to choose what they believe the best option is for them. But yeah, tax planning is very important. And that's what I'm talking about here, because tax planning is tax planning is when you consider your financial situation and make sure that you're not going to end up with a huge tax bill at the end of the year.
Yeah, there's some things too that, you're just making me think about so many things. You go to the store, you go to a restaurant, you get your receipts, you throw them away. You have your credit card that gives you 5% cash back if you remember to sign up every 3 months, to have that thing going. And there's so many different intricacies that people have. What's important for people to keep, or what kinds of is record keeping important for people?
Absolutely, record keeping is important. First off, if you own a business and you don't have a profit and loss and a balance sheet, you don't have financial statements, how do you know how your business is? How do you know the health of your business? Mm-hmm. How would you measure? You're a doctor, Dr. Arnold. How would you measure someone's health? You would take their vitals and you would record them and you would compare them to what the average is, correct?
Right. Yeah.
In the financial world, the way we take someone's vitals is to prepare their profit and loss, to prepare their financial statements. Mm-hmm. The way we measure their health is to analyze those financial statements. And the way we then recommend treatment is to do the tax planning for the future to make sure that we can grow the business and achieve the goals that people are trying to achieve. Some examples that have happened recently. I actually was just working with an entrepreneurial couple here that in town. I'm in Homewood, Illinois, that owns a cafe, and they were very scared because they had none of their records put together. They gave us all the documentation. We put together all the records, and we took them from a situation where they could have potentially owed up to $600,000. And we took their tax liability all the way down to $10,000.
Oh my God.
So
talk about a difference.
That's the power of accounting and financial statements and knowing the tax laws and rules and regulations and being able to plan based on those tax laws, rules, and regulations. Because what I've actually also discussed with that client now is that, hey, because that was their 2023 tax returns.
Right.
What I've actually now discussed with those clients is, hey, let's get started on your 2024 so we can get that done, so we can get caught up to 2025, so that come 2026, when we're talking about your tax returns, we're talking about what level of refund you can expect, not what level of taxes you're going to have to pay. And I think you would agree that it is rather impressive to take someone from potential $600,000 liability over here to $10,000 refund over here.
Yes.
I'm sorry, $10,000 liability over here.
Yes, but
yeah. I'm sorry, I misspoke. But even more impressive than that is then being able to go in and be able to help that group not have to continue to pay taxes when April 15th comes around every year. Now we can go in and plan for it, make the payments ahead of time, and I can have the conversation with those same clients 2 years from now that's going to say, great news, JF, you're going to get a $10,000 refund, and JT, you're going to get a $7,000 refund. And do I know that that's the numbers that they'll be in 2 years? No, I don't. But I do know that if we do the tax planning for their situation, that they will absolutely have the power to determine what their tax situation will be come tax day.
Yeah, we have a question from someone, Yvette Jones Swanson, but she is Vet Mentors LLC, and she's asking, what's considered wages?
That is a tricky question. Are we talking about from the perspective of an employee or the perspective of an employer? I can give you both answers if you like.
Okay, yes, okay.
Okay. Also, I'll answer that question really quick. It's the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. So from the perspective of an employee, wages are any money that you earn from an employment situation where you have voluntarily given that employer a W-4, and then that employer is required to file an information return called a W-2 on your behalf as the employee. From the employer's perspective, wages can be a little trickier than that, because wages for, we'll set up a meeting, absolutely, no problem. 708-914-8220. Please call us. Leave a message. We'll get to you in the morning. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone here right now to answer the phones. So we wages from the employer's perspective, if we're talking about unemployment, can actually include contractors. Because if the contractor is doing the work under their social security number and they don't have what the Department of Employment Security considers to be an independent business that they are operating, then the Department of Employment Security will count those contractor payments that are paid out as contractor payments, and the information return that is issued to that contractor is a 1099. They will still count those payments as wages for the purposes of unemployment tax payments. Similarly, the IRS can come in and do what's called a worker determination audit, where if they believe that an employer is that a company is treating a group of workers as contractors, when the law would require them to treat them as employees, the IRS can come in, force the business to change from recognizing those people as contractors to recognizing them as employees, and force the business to then pay back payroll taxes based on the contractor payments they made, that the IRS will now say should have been filed as wages. And those payroll tax payments can be pretty huge, especially because we have to consider you're not going to be hit with any withholding tax on that because you didn't withhold any taxes. But if, let's say I paid out $1 million in contractor payments, and the IRS comes in and says, no, those are wages. So now I automatically owe the IRS $153,000 because 15.3% of the wages that I paid was due as Social Security, Medicare, FICA taxes. Okay. Now the remainder, in addition to that 153,000, I now also get a 25% failure to file penalty, a 10% failure deposit penalty, a 25% failure to pay penalty, and interest of 8% for the entire time that I did not pay the liability that I had, even though I didn't know I had the liability.
Yeah.
So if you want to avoid that very sticky situation as an employer, come talk to us about how your workers are classified and how they should be classified, because we can help you make that determination so the IRS doesn't do it for you. 708-914-8220.
Okay, David Milinek, really good to hear from you, president of CAT and Milinek, and extraordinary financial expert. Make sure you give him a call at 708-914-8220. I know I will. But in fact, what is the actual deadline for April?
April 15th.
April 15th.
If you get the extension, you don't have to file until October 15th. So if you're worried about it, call us now, 708-914-8220. We can get you the extension before April 15th, and then you don't have to file by April 15th.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, David.
No problem. Always look forward to it next time.
All right.
Everybody, I wanted to take a minute and just say good evening. Hope you're having a great day. I know my name is Rob Howard, and I've been hosting our green industry infrastructure conversations with you. But what I wanted to do today is bring in someone that can kind of elaborate a little more. J.R. Wellman is here with us today. J.R., I'm really excited about having you here, because what we've been trying to do is to establish something tangible for veterans who are worried about this economy, trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with all of those skills that I got from the military? And so they're going to be moving forward. But let me give everyone just a little bit about JR. JR, by the way, co-founder of Overwatch Capital, where the focus is on microgrid and energy operations. A Navy veteran, thank you for your service, my brother. Honorably served on the USS Oklahoma City. He was part of the operations team. Now, that was a nuclear fast attack submarine. And so JR is an energy systems expert specializing in renewables, waste to energy, hydrogen fuel cells, and what we call the circular energy economy. And JR, I really want you to spend some time talking about that circular energy economy. Now, his expertise, like mine, was in nuclear power. And then we've got RNG biogas, anaerobic digestion. We're going to have to touch on that as well. And hydrogen fuel cell systems. Of course, JR is one of the best minds we have who can kind of put all these pieces together. He's held various roles prior to Overwatch Capital at Bloom Energy, and of course, graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Fordham University. JR, how about we start with what this circular economy actually is?
Well, sure thing. Well, Rob, really appreciate the great intro. Very generous of you. Always nice to take care of fellow shipmates, right? That's the idea. Well, at any rate, yeah, circular economy, ultimately, if you think about it, the way that we live as people on the planet, the way that other animals and plants live, things that are waste become an input to other particular entities. So the CO2 coming out of our mouths right now as we talk ends up feeding plants. The heat that we give off ends up helping the atmosphere stay warm for other, fungi and plants to stay viable. So wherever you go, whatever you're used to, other things are creating, we call them externalities. So the externality of burning natural gas keeps the heat on in the wintertime to keep you warm in your house. So there's kind of fundamental principles like that, where you go from the micro level at the household, person to person, family to family, it extends out into the macro level of the planet. So the circular economy basically tries to say, hey, look, we've got a lot of great industries and we need to expand and raise the living requirements for other people. How do we take things that are often overlooked or maybe wasted and then repurpose those particular resources that are normally perceived as being waste products or losses, and just use them in a different way?
So you talk about waste and waste products on a large scale, just people all around the country. When you are talking about waste, give some examples of what we can use as waste and create something positive out of it.
Sure. There's a lot of examples. I'd say the simplest way to think about it, certainly in some parts of the country, in the suburbs, the urban areas, we now see things like food co-digestion, which requires taking food that would either get put into landfills, put it down a garbage disposal instead, or put it into a green waste bin. And then that particular food that we're not eating is then turned into electricity, or it's turned into fertilizer, or both. Those would be a good example of something kind of at the front end of it. Alternatively, something that is maybe a little more abstract, it's the concept of using heat. So everyone, when you're really cold, heat's great. The rest of the world, when it's too hot, it's a problem, but it's got to get moved. So heat is always moving, one way or the other, depending upon the temperature differential, and it takes energy to move heat. So in order to help maintain people's comfort zones through air-conditioned, climate-controlled, heated environments, there's new there's a new effort underway to take through building codes and advanced building engineering to take the heat of different processes within a building or external to a building, and then use it to make the interior comfort of the building even easier. So whether it's something obvious like food waste or green waste in your yard, all the way to something like, hey, imagine what your air conditioner is putting out as heat to make you cool. If you co-locate that, you have another process that you can put that into, then all of a sudden you're getting more work, more productive work for the same amount of energy that's being expended, which is really important to make all of our lives, the quality of our lives, better.
And another thing, now that we talked a little bit about the waste piece, because basically I want to get to all of these parts to start talking about the infrastructure, because one of the things we're trying to do here on American Heroes Group is really help veterans lean in, process, transferring those skills to these industries. So we've got all of these different waste products. We've got solar, we've got wind, we have all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's got to be delivered to the home or business, right? What do you see going on with our national infrastructure with regard to what's coming and how we maximize it for good for our veteran community?
So you want the short or the long answer? I guess that's the question. So there's a lot of different ways to describe that opportunity. So there's a lot of problems that you just described, but within problems, there are typically opportunities. The good news about the United States is we're not really resource constrained as a nation compared to some other nations on the planet. So that's where some of these efficiency drives about the circular economy can become a little bit difficult, because it's the economics of energy are actually pretty favorable in the United States.
Right.
That being said, because the energy in the United States is a big part of our economy because it's readily available, it's a really good industry for veterans to go into. So I think, you and I look at it from the standpoint typically of, say, nuclear power, et cetera. But ultimately, as I learned, if I wanted to come back to California after my time in the Navy, nuclear was kind of diminishing in terms of its relevance, at least politically or policy-wise within the state, at least for a couple decades. And so I had to make a choice. Do I go into alternative energies like wind and solar and biogas at wastewater plants and landfills and fuel cells? So that's kind of where I went, because just you always want to be ahead of the government if you can, front run the regulators and give them what they want. It takes a lot of work to turn abstract demands from policy people at the government level into concrete outcomes that benefit us. And I think that's where a lot of veterans can, take their perseverance, their discipline, their skill sets, and be that bridge between the abstractions that humanity wants versus the concrete solutions to, make a better life for us and a better life for the planet on the back end.
So I know when I left the military, I actually spent quite a bit of time in the nuclear industry. And what was always fascinating to me were all of the options outside of that industry that eventually are connected to that industry. I was amazed at the number of opportunities that were developed simply by having a nuclear power plant, and the amount of funding that went into those local communities. Now, a number of our veterans are in some of the rural areas of the country, others in urban areas. What general things would you recommend they do if I just got out? I'm interested in what you're talking about because of all the opportunities in this particular area with regard to what our transmission and distribution systems look like, what our energy systems not only look like now, but are transitioning to. How do they get started? Just what do they do first?
All right, so that's a really, really good question. It depends if you want to do it by yourself or if you want to go into the connected network that exists through the headhunting complex. So one of the things I learned in my time in the Navy was, obviously people have their own motivations, and I'm kind of used to doing things by myself. But right towards the end of the Navy, started realizing the Navy right now and the Marine Corps, the armed forces in reality they're really the best workforce training program we have in the United States. And it's also the only significantly serious workforce training program that most types of industries, especially those that are super dependent upon energy to do real work, to provide real goods and services, the ability to be, to show up to work on time, to be coachable, to read and follow procedures, to think appropriately before taking action, to work a little bit of overtime if needed, so on and so forth. The military background translates very well into many of these power and, say, chemical related industries that have really good jobs across mechanical, electrical, instrumentation, electronics type disciplines, even communications as well, that are now becoming super important to the interconnected reality of our main weapon systems across most parts of the military. So, believe it or not, the complexity of the military industrial complex across all those domains means that it's a very easy transition to at least get a chance to get a good start with a really good, typically Fortune 500 company, doing 40 hours a week under salary with upside of overtime and good benefits. You might have to relocate, but how do you get access to that? It's usually you look for headhunter recruiting type companies. Bradley Morris, Orion, there's a couple others out there that come to mind. They helped me out way back in 2008 when I transitioned. And, I had 28 job interviews in 3 months, 24 job offers. And it was right during the recession, the big bad recession back then, the great financial crisis. So, if you've got the ability and willingness to, relocate at least 100 or 200 miles away from where you're from and where you're going to go back to, there's a pretty good shot that those recruiting firms can probably get you a job in those locations. Adding on to that, once you get that job, you want to stick around for probably, I would say, at least 5 years, and get, keep your nose clean like we tried to do in the Navy, in the military, get a good resume, the way you got a good discharge, honorable discharge. Work 45, 50 hours a week, look like the hero. It's very easy as a civilian to be the hero compared to the norms of 70, 80, 90 plus hour work weeks while you're in the service. Sometimes it might feel almost like a vacation, actually. It certainly was for me. But anyways, I think those are the general first principles about transitioning out of the military, that, be willing to put your hand up, be willing to learn, be willing to look things up, be willing to be of assistance, fit in within the new hierarchy. Anytime you report to a new command in the military, you're better off just kind of being quiet and helpful for the first 6 to 12 months you're there, before having, trying to flex any opinions and do that. So you just gotta play the game. But the good news is there's a lot of opportunities in the civilian world, especially with a general or an honorable discharge, getting out of the military. And a lot of these companies, the only people they're willing to hire and train for 2 or 3 years to gain real skills beyond the military are actually veterans. So you're not really going to find that without being a military veteran, unless you're maybe a college graduate. But even so, most of the jobs coming in these skilled trade type endeavors actually end up paying more than most of these junior engineer jobs that these college types get when they're coming straight out of school into the workforce. So another little bonus for all the work that you put in. It really does matter as a civilian on the back end. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I can share my time in the nuclear industry. It was amazing how you looked at other jobs, and we were used to working 18-hour days. However, I'm like, so I work 12-hour shifts and I only have to do 2 or 3 of them, and I get to go home for 3 or 4 days and not show up. And if I do, I'm making overtime. It was mind blowing. So you talked about that whole process of getting out, moving forward, starting what to do on the job. But some folks still have that entrepreneurial itch. Yeah. What are some options? Let's say they go through that process and they are doing it, and they're working there for 7, 8 years. They're learning the industry, but I just need to do my own thing. So what are your recommendations for that type of veteran, that they love that independence, they love being in charge of a crew, they want to move into something else? What do you recommend for them?
All right, so that becomes, in some ways, it's an easy question to answer, and in other ways, it's complex. And what I mean by that differentiation is, it gets complex when you're married, you have kids and real obligations with a mortgage and food and all that. It's hard to become an entrepreneur if you're already, raising a family. Money doesn't grow on trees, and being an entrepreneur, if you think it's just like showing up and creating an LLC and sharing the information with a few people, that's not it. Ultimately, I would say the cornerstone of how to do well, whether it's in the workforce or as an entrepreneur, if you figure out how to observe and identify issues and pain points, in essence, problems for people and for businesses or both, and then you can assist on solving them, whether it's an issue of time efficiency, whether it's an issue of resource conservation, of money, however you want to think about it, manpower, you name it. If you see problems and you can learn how to try to solve them, and raise your hand and talk to people about it and say, hey, perhaps I could help you, or would you let me try it out? Maybe you have to work for free for a little bit to get some credibility, and then have people end up saying, you know what, this person did a good job. They'll often brag on your behalf. So if you learn how to identify and fix problems, and you have a little bit of a detailed work ethic and follow through, so you minimize or eliminate rework on behalf of people, then all of a sudden in the civilian world, you can become an entrepreneur. It can take 6 to 12 or 18 or 24 months or even a little longer, depending on what type of business you're in. But ultimately, most people are short on time. They're a little bit short on money, typically even dual income family type households. If they have more money, then they're certainly short on time. So the time that they do have, you can become a service provider, whether it's handyman work, you can put a lot of your listed skill sets to work, even something as simple as cleaning, detail type work. It runs the gamut. But if you save people time, you do a good detailed work, and you're trustworthy and you show up and you're forthright and honest, 70, 80% of the time you'll get, repeat clients, and they'll start talking to their friends and talking to their network and posting about you online on different websites. Certainly I learned that. I got, laid off from a job back in 2016 and started working around the house to, when I was helping my family with a health issue. So I stuck at home for a few months, kind of like being on deployment at the family house. I only could get outside for a couple hours, a couple times a day due to some health stuff going on, and started working on my parents' house. And then neighbors were like, oh, could you help me with this? Could you help me with that? Well, lo and behold, they started, I was doing this, once the family health stuff wrapped up in a few months, I didn't even realize I needed to go back to work, because as a handyman doing electrical and plumbing type work, ended up just getting into that, solving problems and doing it incrementally and fairly as a decent rate. And all of a sudden people just start spreading the word. So, it's not necessarily fast. It's not always easy, but if you solve problems and you're earnest, the universe ends up, unfolding to your benefit if you really try to help people solve problems in an earnest manner. So ultimately, I'm single. It's a little easier to do that than if you've got, a wife and the kids and a family, but there's a few different ways to do it. If you think of it that way, you want to become an entrepreneur, self-employed, then you turn it into, figure out how to hire some people to help you as a force multiplier. So not all of your time is spent just doing all the work.
Right.
If you've got good managerial skills, especially being in the military, you see how organizations are structured and run. You might have a good idea about that in terms of how to, have supervisory reach, and then, leverage other people's time to help solve problems. And you make a little bit of a cut on top of that, and that's how it typically works. So there's a few different ways, but for me, I learned it. I was kind of hustling while I was working after hours in the military as well. So, if you go back to your normal military 70, 80, 90-hour week that you're used to, you've got your nice stable job for 40, 50 hours a week. you get some of this other time, either get your education and or then start to do your own thing as a self-employed. I think for veterans who are kind of used to those time pressures, that's a really good use of time. That's where it's easier for us to do that than say a lot of civilians that, are kind of used to a 30, 40-hour week, maximum effort level. And it's like, as a military veteran, we're kind of used to, having to bust it, all the time. And you do that for 2 or 3 years as a civilian, you're further ahead than your peers. That's for sure.
Right. So let's take that and build on it, because you really laid out the fundamentals. I'm big on fundamentals, learning the basics, figuring them out. Now I have that. Now I want you to put your thoughts to looking at the United States, looking at our infrastructure, looking at where we are now, where we're trying to go, and then build on. We know basically you've given us the discussion and the talking points and the foundation on how to start and how to get things moving and what to look for. But I want your opinion about looking at the United States, because I'm based in California. I can tell you about California and California's energy market and the chaos and what they're trying to do. People can have a good heart, but they may not necessarily understand the engineering that goes into actually delivering electrons to your home. We get that. But nationally, do you have a feel for areas that you could pinpoint and say, those workers that are needed, this is going on over here. This is a place, if you're there, these are some of the things you could do. What's your national view of this green industry, the infrastructure that's being built as we speak?
Rob, that's a really good question. There's different regional realities across the United States, across different types of industries and say infrastructure that is supporting of those industries. A good example is that many people may not know this, but there's certain pipelines. We're all used to oil and gas pipelines and water pipelines. That's what most people are used to. Many people may not realize there's actually ammonia pipelines in the Midwest from, say, Texas to Oklahoma. I think they go all the way up to Minnesota. Why is that? It's related to the production of fertilizer. Now, there's also hydrogen pipelines and some CO2 pipelines, especially in the oil and gas complex around Houston. So we already do have a hydrogen economy that's just nestled right now within the oil and gas refining and chemical industries in certain areas. So the good news is, state by state, the regulatory environments on the state level typically are the enabling mechanisms for certain types of industries. So I would suggest that with a lot of, say, military background, especially with a technical background, you're going to see kind of a gravity of certain types of backgrounds that are going to go into the oil and gas space. Some of it could be out in the middle of nowhere drilling, and they're pretty good jobs if you like a bit of that kind of lifestyle and 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And then you go into the more organized, realities of the petrochemical transport and then processing and chemical industries. So you're looking at a lot of places around Houston, Louisiana. Those are kind of more of a corporate reality rather than a kind of hustling out there in the oil fields. If you go into other parts of the country, you'll see areas of the country that have really cheap electricity are typically going to be manufacturing heavy. So if you're into like working at shift work in the manufacturing industries, whether it's automotive, metal, foundries, you name it, high tech, you're going to see that kind of some biases towards certain parts of the Southeast, some parts of the Midwest, some parts of the Rust Belt. And you're going to do a lot of work on, say, automation. You're going to work on PLCs, instrumentation control, electromechanical is going to be a lot of that in those particular parts of the country. In other types of industries, or I should say other parts of the country, you'll see other sensitivities. So if you're a veteran with those skill sets, you're going to see a lot of If you're going to go to the Northeast, then you're probably going to be getting a job that might be more related to utilities, at the oil, say natural gas utilities, the electric utilities, the water utilities, wastewater. And some of this could be public, some of these could be private type jobs. Though a lot of them, if you're in the cities, you're going to see people with our types of disciplines getting into elevator repair and plumbing and HVAC, which are really important industries with really good pay and skills and longevity in those particular environments. So the good news is there's always jobs if you're willing to raise your hand and go search for them. Sometimes you might take a hit on status, perceived social status by the different type of job that you might take, depending upon if it's semi-skilled, skilled, trade, educated, whatever. It doesn't really matter. As long as you can pay the bills and keep putting your one foot in front of the other, you'll get to where you want to be. But sometimes you got to have a little bit of patience. Certainly I had to learn that in terms of taking some jobs that, now you want to be a big deal earlier on in life, but you know what? If you suck it up, you're going to get ahead and learn a lot more on the way. And then in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're in a much better spot. So there's different ways to think about, can you follow procedures? Can you think critically? Can you collaborate? Can you use safety procedures and protocols? These are all fundamentals that really undergird the value of the enlisted experience within the armed services, in my estimation, to then go find jobs in whichever industries that typically happen based upon the policy realities and environmental resources that are then able to support different types of industries across the United States.
And so in the few minutes we have left, what I want to do now is put a ribbon on this. All of these industries, we get out and we get started. There's legislation about transmission lines going, because now we need to start moving power. How transferable are the skills in petrochemical, in natural gas, and in utilities? How transferable are those to what's happening with our green energy economy? Because I see so many parallels, but I'd like for you to chime in on it because I know how much of a background you have.
Yeah, Rob, I think in reality, they're becoming interchangeable. In reality, the concept that like alternative energy was some sort of super different reality than traditional industries, physical and engineering fundamentals, chemistry fundamentals, they're all the same no matter what industry you're in. The stuff that changes is just how energy is harnessed and utilized and then conveyed and conferred into the market, the economics, right? So that's where you can see wind and solar. Ultimately, all they do is create electrons. They create energy in the form of electrons. If you go into, say, the biogas, landfills, natural gas, guess what? They're all methane molecules being created by the same types of, microbiological entities that give all of us the power to stink up rooms. It's all fundamental. So it's like you can fill the pipelines with methane the same way that you can fill your room with it. And you can also then go, create electrons on the back end. And ultimately, you can take electrons and uranium on the physical side and turn it into electrons of electricity. So there's all this interplay between these industries, and any industry that consumes energy, which is all of them, go figure, then creates heat. So if you then figure that out, then you've got HVAC. So it's like a bookend. You have the energy inputs of resources, different transfer pathways to convert it as a resource into an energy that another industry uses. The externalities of those industries now are their own sub-industries of heat and pollution